This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Now the backs there are. He backs it. He kicks it. Oh, the fall from Dersma. This is the speed of McKercher. 3 bounces down the wing. He keeps going. 4 bounces. Joining the chorus. The Can't Lose Kangas are AFLW premiers.
Hello, welcome back to North Pod. Ooh, that is a disappointing game, certainly a disappointing second half. The sort of result that, you know, we're hoping that we have very few of these types of performances this year. We've seen that kind of game we've seen so many times over the past 5 years where we kind of hang in there to halftime and then it just falls away after halftime. Yeah, really disappointing third quarter in particular. I was concerned that we were going to have this kind of game more often this year, and obviously the first 3 games we avoided having a game like this. But yeah, super disappointing result. No doubt Sydney are a good team. They were in the grand final last year, but also this was quite a different team to the side that lined up in that grand final. So you've got to, I guess, make sense of those two things in your mind. Yeah, a tough game to watch for sure. And just, I guess it's going to be interesting for me to review. I had I'm recording this on Sunday morning. I had the wedding of a fellow Shinboner to attend last night, so I ended up watching it kind of in reverse order. I got home at halftime and sat down and watched the second half live. Oof, that was a tough watch. And then obviously I've got up this morning. I've watched the first half, and you know it made for interesting watch, particularly how different I think those two halves were. I think had I watched that first half, I would have been even more deflated by the second half. But because that third quarter was my first viewing, I guess there's a feeling of here we go again. So yeah, if my thoughts seem a little bit wishy-washy, that might be because I've watched it a little bit out of order. Congratulations to that Shinboner that I'm sure is no doubt listening on a fantastic wedding. But let's do our best to get through this game review and relive it, even though I'm sure that we don't really want to. Roo review time. Let's start with team selection and a couple of changes. Initially there were 2, and then we had a third late change due to illness. So Griffin Logue back in from his hamstring awareness, small strain, whatever it happened to be. And Matt Whitlock came in for his first game for the year, first game as at AFL level. That was initially what was announced, with Toby Pink and Will Phillips coming out. Both of those just omissions. And then unfortunately, Finn O'Sullivan was a little unwell, so he was announced that he was going to be out on Friday, and Riley Hardiman came in and played the sub role as a result of that. Not sure who was lined up to play the sub. Maybe it was going to be someone like Tucker or Dylan Stevens again, but Riley Hardiman came in. I mean, it was great to get some game time into Hardiman. I'll talk about him a little bit later. Unfortunate for O'Sullivan to miss, but no doubt he'll be back if he's fit and available. He'll be straight back in the team. I thought it was interesting to take Pink out and put Whitlock in, or I guess in theory, really, we were taking Pink and a midfielder out and then bring 2 key defenders in Logue and Whitlock. So you can kind of look at it from 2 different perspectives. It's a tough one because I do think we've had one too many midfielders. Will Phil has kind of been that little extra surplus to needs, and he's found it hard to find the footy. So I understand changing the team balance in that way, but maybe a tall was not what we needed for this game. It was difficult, I thought, for Whitlock to assert himself, and that's okay. You know, I thought he had a solid first game, but again, we'll talk more about that decision as the game went on. Whitlock was subbed out during the third quarter for Hardiman. I think Hardiman probably would have been a better fit for the way that we want to start the game. We always need more distribution off half-back, and boy, did we need it in this game. I thought Pink just going back to Pink's omission, I thought he was solid last week, but I've got no doubt they want to get some game time into Whitlock, kind of like we did with big shotty Will Dawson last year. So, look, Obviously, great to have Logue back. I like the idea of getting some time into Hardman and Whitlock. And, I think on paper going into the game, I was pretty happy with what we decided to do. As it turns out, copped an absolute shellacking in the game. So let's talk about that. Final score, North Melbourne 8-4-52, defeated by the Swans 18-9-117. So a 65-point belting, unfortunately, and yeah, we'll talk about it, but it all fell apart in that third quarter. It was a really tough watch. Let's start at the start. It was actually the middle for me, but I think I've managed to collate my thoughts logically here. I mean, if you watch the first 5 minutes or so, you'd be mistaken for thinking it was going to be a really super competitive game. I thought we brought it. I thought we were tackling really hard. The pressure was on. Both Parker and Constanti, you could see they'd really come with a want to be physical and to attack the footy and to attack whoever has the footy and trying to impress playing their former sides. And I thought, it wasn't just them. I thought as a collective, we started really strongly in that first 5 minutes or so. And then, we've seen it all before. It fell off. The all too familiar crept in. We started biting off some short kicks that were inviting pressure or just was straight up turnovers in some instances. We had that inability to break tackles. We weren't strong enough through the hips. Probably the worst part though, and this was consistent throughout this game and has been a consistent issue for us, entries inside 50 just continued to be shocking, continued to waste the footy. When you get so little of the footy inside forward 50, you've got to at least, give our forwards a chance. And I think, that first quarter was a great example of not how to kick inside 50, and that just continued throughout the game. In terms of errors, that crept in and created this mess, plenty of examples here. I thought one early was Tom Powell had the ball on half back. He was being pushed or corralled boundary side and onto his left foot. Needed to kick on his left foot, but he tried to, take that extra step to straighten and then kick on his right, but that invited the pressure and he was pushed off the kick and it went outside, out of bounds on the full. You've got to have a left foot that you can rely on there. And that's, probably Tommy Powell did not have a good game, hasn't returned to his form from 2 weeks ago. He's been down since then. And that's a really good example of something that's missing from his game, that ability to, kick on your unpreferred foot and just, make something work in that situation. He really tried too hard to get onto his right foot and resulted in it going out of bounds on the full. Another example, we're chanting up beautifully through the middle and Paul Curtis kicks it inside 50 and misses LDU by about 20 metres. Opposition teams, that's where they're punishing us. They get that chain going and then their final kick from, say, 70 or 80 metres out is finding a target. And we just aren't able to do that far too often. Again, Zerha receives a really nice inboard kick from Paul Curtis, so he sort of made up for his bad inside 50, and then Zerha butchers his kick inside 50, and then that ends up going up the other end immediately for a Sydney goal to McLean. They just kept scoring off turnover, and we simply couldn't. And, how many times have we said that over the past couple of years? It's just the combination of awful turnovers by us, an inability to defend those turnovers with whole ground defense, and then conversely, our lack of ability to damage and hurt teams on turnover. In the Melbourne game, that's the reason that we were able to get on that massive run, is that we were actually able to finish our work, create the turnovers, and then hurt the opposition with goals. We weren't able to do that at all. Sydney's defence was far too strong, and individually, Sydney were desperate to stop that kind of stuff, and it just... Yeah, it was really hard to watch. Despite, having some clearance dominance, I thought in the first quarter, we just weren't able to convert to scores. So if you can't score from turnover and you can't score from a stoppage, you're not scoring. The only other option is from a kick in, and that's pretty rare. You might kick a goal, maybe 2 from a kick in per game. So if those two scoring sources aren't working, when I hope. It was interesting to see Harry Sheezel spending plenty of time down back, doing what we've seen him do over the past couple of years, getting the ball several times in the same chain, making good decisions. I thought that was a positive from the first quarter. He seemed to be kind of splitting his time between midfield and defence. Maybe that's partly because we had Finn O'Sullivan out of the side. We needed another ball user in the back half, or potentially that was going to happen anyway. It's hard to say, but I mean, it's obvious. I thought he was super impressive. I thought that was a smart move to get him more involved in the game. We've seen, he's been a bit more quiet than usual for the first 3 weeks. This was definitely a return to the Sheezel that we've seen over the past couple of years. He found plenty of the footy and was actually doing something with it. It was a very familiar sight. We're not playing very well at all, but Sheez is playing a good game. It was, we've seen that playbook plenty of times over the last couple of years. We ended up conceding a couple of goals late in the quarter, which, we'd fought our way back into it. We conceded the first 3, we kicked the next 2, and unfortunately conceded some goals late. We've heard that all before. I thought then the second quarter was probably our best of the game. McKercher kicked our best goal of the game, a brilliant running goal from 50 yards for a nice chain. I'll get to that a little bit later in the podcast, but that was a highlight of the game. I think he's really coming into his own as that winger that can go forward. He did butcher a kick inside 50 shortly after that, which was a turnover goal to the Swans. But by and large, I think this was a good quarter by us. We tackled really hard. We pressured. We won plenty of holding the balls with our tackling. We just weren't able to, finish our work. We weren't clean enough with the ball to put scoreboard pressure on, unfortunately. It was one of those wasted quarters where ultimately we worked really hard. We played really well for 90% of it, but the 10% really cost us. And it's the same stuff. Simkin had a really nice spin move in the middle of the ground, evaded a would-be tackler, and then kicks it wonderfully to Nick Larkey's disadvantage. Couldn't have hit, I think that one was Nick Blakey, but couldn't have hit the opposition player any better. Speaking of which, of Nick Larkey, he did spend some time in the ruck, which I think was a way of getting him involved. Had a really quiet first quarter where he just couldn't shake Tom McCartan. It was McCartan, it was Blakey. Generally, there was 2 of them at least trying to crowd Larkey, and it worked really well inside 50 for the Swans. So I think getting him up and playing some Nick Larkey in the ruck, I wouldn't want to see that as the plan every game, but I think getting him some touches when the ball's not coming down to him is a smart move. Jack Darling wasn't playing that well in the ruck in any case, so we needed another option. So, if we're speaking about tactical moves, Sheezel's move down back was smart. I think having Larkey come up and play some time in the ruck was also smart. But unfortunately, I guess the smarts ran out there because the game really did spiral after the second quarter. Even, I would say, late in that second quarter is when things went wrong. We played a really good, hard-fought quarter. We were 3 goals to their 2, so we're going to go in with a winning quarter. Caleb Daniel takes a kick in with about a minute to go. He plays on, puts himself under pressure, changes his mind about 3 times, looks very uncertain, and then ends up going short and high to a central position. So if you had a checklist of things not to do when you're under pressure deep in defence, they would be the 3 things not to do. He's kicked it, he's given it some airtime, he's gone short, and he's gone to a central position. Just all 3 the things that you don't want to be doing. Riley Bice spoiled it, Chad Warner crumbed it and gold, and it just sums us up, sums Caleb Daniels' decision-making up at times. So much pressure, I get that, but it was just all kinds of the wrong manoeuvre. Ultimately, we lost the quarter by a point as opposed to winning the quarter by 5 points, which is what it should have been. And that, in the context of the game, not massive, but the way it happens, I think, it is massive, because that was a real deflating moment late in the quarter and just completely needless. Did not need to happen. Either hit the kick, there's your first option, or number 2, if you've gotten yourself under that kind of pressure, go long towards the boundary, kick to a contest, get the ball out of bounds. You've got a stoppage situation with maybe 30 to 40 seconds remaining. We'll take that, but it was just not the right move. And then after that, from that moment on, jeepers, just an absolutely awful third quarter. I thought the first stoppage of that third quarter really summed it up. We allowed Braden Campbell, just to burst forward, get in front of the stoppage, take a bounce, kick a goal from 50 metres, and that summed up how things were going to go for us in the third quarter. Chom had a shocking minute where he got outmarked in front by someone 10 centimetres plus shorter than him. Then shortly after that, gives away a 50-metre penalty. He was late to a marking contest, and it just, it was one of those quarters where everything that could go wrong did go wrong. LDU was bombing it long from 60 metres. I don't know why he needs to do that. Just find a target. If you're going to kick it long, you need to make the distance or hit someone up 20 or 30 metres out from goal. Bombing it long to right on the point line is not a solution under any circumstances, really. I don't know what happened at halftime, but our clearance setup just completely fell apart. We were pretty good at stoppage in the first half, but there was just so many examples where the Swans would just walk it out of clearance with seemingly no pressure. There was one where Heaney stepped through 3 of our stationary players and just hit a beautifully hit-up kick to Hanley, put it in space. Was one of those ones where the forward was led to the ball by where the midfielder kicked it to. The less said about this quarter, the better. It was 7-1. The game was clearly lost in this quarter. From a 20-odd point margin at half time, you're thinking, okay, we're in the game, but you lose the quarter by 6 goals. It's game over. After that, that last quarter just needs to be played. Like Hardiman came in. No, it was actually in the third quarter that he came in for Whitlock, and I thought he looked lively, but there's no opportunity for him to really win the game for us at this point. Whitlock had a solid first game. He was caught holding the ball by Amadi. Aside from that, I thought he was relatively composed. He got involved where he could. Certainly didn't do anything that made you go, okay, that's why we've got him in the side, or that's why we gave up our first round draft pick to get him. But there's plenty of time for that. It's his first AFL game. He probably isn't ready. I've certainly been calling for him or a Dawson to come in, but looking at the way that he played and just his frame, he's still such a slight frame. I think potentially if he is going to come in, he's got to really not be playing the role of a tool. And he was probably playing a hybrid role in this game. He was an extra tall in the side, but Chom is already kind of playing a hybrid third tall role, so it's pretty hard for two to be playing that role. I think you end up a little bit imbalanced in defence, and potentially that's one of the reasons that we found it so hard to transition to footy. But I'm certainly not putting that on Whitlock. That's more around selection, and that's probably why I off the top was talking about Hardiman would have been a better fit. In any case, we played out the game in the last quarter. I thought Sydney really ramped up the pressure. They continued to not allow us to have any free time, piled on the tackling and the corralling, and just gave us no space whatsoever. I thought Aiden Core battled his heart out, gave Amadi some competition. Amadi kicked 4 goals. He had a good game, but I thought Core battled it out and was spoiling right to the end. And then I guess some consolation goals to Nick Larkey late in the quarter or late in the game were, at least nice that we were still playing the game out. He took a mark or juggled a mark right on the boundary line about 30 metres out and kicked truly with a beautiful drop punt that went straight through. Then took another mark later, moments later, and kicked another goal. So for him to pop up late just shows, it wasn't his day, but he was able to contribute. Absolutely, they were consolation goals, but he stayed alive, and maybe that's where I think that time up in the ruck and just giving him some touch helped him contribute later in the game. The fact that he juggled that mark probably 4 times and was desperate to pull it in just shows, the heart he's got. So really, really good late performance from Larkey. Not enough to, get him in the votes or anything like that, but it's good to see that he was at least alert and alive in that last quarter. And I think that goal from the pocket where he's drop punted it, with a really, really tight angle, there was an article during the week about, his goal kicking routine. I think it might have been Riley Beveridge that had the article on AFL.com. Spoke about his routine and how he tries to simplify goal kicking, and the commentators were referencing that as well. But, that is part of what makes him such an elite scorer, is he just doesn't waste opportunities like that. It would have been fair enough if he'd sprayed that one through for a point, but the fact that he took that mark on that angle, knew his routine, went back and kicked it, we're very lucky to have a player of Nick Larkey's talent. Anyway, ultimately, a shocking game. It needed to be over faster, and I certainly am pleased to be through that game review, because, like I said, that second half, which is what I watched first, was really, really tough viewing, and not the sort of footy that we want to be playing, in a year where we're hoping to take some steps forward. So, yeah, disappointing. It would be the word for it, I think. Story of the game, and I guess I have alluded to it, but this is where I'm going to really spell it out. The kicking efficiency and, more importantly, the ability to hit those kind of medium difficulty kicks is the difference between us and pretty much every other side in the competition. If you want to take probably Melbourne, West Coast and Richmond out of that, other sides are just going to be so much better at hitting those not difficult kicks, but kicks where there's a bit of pressure. A medium difficulty kick where you've got to hit the target. The Swans just did that time and time again, and we weren't able to do that. They owned the corridor, and with the exception of maybe 3 or 4 players, or 3 or 4 plays rather, they didn't allow us through there at all. The only way we were able to get through the corridor is if we chained up some handballs and won a contest, like either broke a tackle or got the ball to ground and then beat them on the spread. That was really the only time that we were able to get any ball through the corridor. They squeezed us wide consistently and turned us over pretty much every time we tried to bite something off, even if it was those kind of medium difficulty kicks. I mean, you think of what Caleb Daniel did that I spoke about at the end of the second quarter. That's one that hurts because it's deep inside defensive 50, but there were examples like that where we just turned it over needlessly across all areas of the ground, and the Swans just didn't do it. A player like Riley Bice, I spoke about him earlier, he was the one that spoiled the Caleb Daniel kick that led to Chad Warner's goal. He's the kind of player that hurts. He's a mature age recruit. He's coming in with virtually no experience. He had 26 disposals, 15 marks, 430 metres gained, 2 goal assists off half-back, and was just hitting difficult targets for fun. He made really difficult kicks look easy. He made medium difficulty kicks look easy. But because he was perfect with the way they disposed of it, they looked way easier than they were. We don't have a player like that in our back half. Sheez is back there, but even then he creates through movement, through 1-2s. He shifts the opposition zone. He doesn't necessarily slice them up with his kicking. Bice just cut through it. He really shredded up our whole ground defense, and he had Jake Lloyd and Nick Blakey helping him out in that regard. It wasn't just him, but across the 3 of them, they've got distributors, they've got ball players that can take the game on at halfback and then make clean decisions that shift our zone and get our zone out of position. The Swans just made us pay so often when we turned it over, and conversely, we would get it to about 80 metres out if we're lucky, and then shank a kick inside 50, allow the Swans to waltz the ball up the ground to score. We're not winning games with that kind of differential and that kind of stark difference between the way that we're able to play and the way that our opposition is allowed to play. It's something that's plagued us since 2020. I think in terms of what we can do about it, look, Caleb Daniel probably needs to be playing a little bit further up the ground than that deepest distributor. But if that's the case, then who's kicking out is, I guess, the next question. Like, do we have Sheez playing that deeper role? Do we ruin what is really a good thing at the moment with McKercher higher up the ground? Do we put him back there? Is it Finn O'Sullivan when he returns? Do we try and go back to Zach Fisher, who's currently playing VFL, although I think he might have been injured last week, so that's not an immediate solution. Like, I'm not loving Caleb Daniel in that deeper role. I think he's better as a distributor a little bit higher up when there's a bit more space to play with, I guess. But he's the best option we've got at the moment. So in terms of how we rebound the footy, I really don't know the solution, but we just need to get more kicking everywhere, because we have too many players who can win it, but just aren't able to spend the footy in a damaging, effective way. And that, again, how many times have we heard that? We know that we've drafted some really elite talent and some good kickers, but there's still so many players around them that just are not good disposers of the footy. And I think the way that the game is going at the moment, you've got to have a really good selection of players that are good distributors by foot. And I mean, that's not particularly new. You think about the way that Hawthorn won that three-peat. Sure, they had a lot of left footers, but they had a lot of left footers that were really good kicks. So yeah, it's a real worry. That's not something that's going to be a quick fix. A game plan can support that, but it can't completely hide the fact that when you're on the rebound, you've turned the opposition over. If you can't hit a target, you've just got no hope. I think it's a pretty easy one to identify where the game was won and lost. The Swans were super effective when they turned us over, and we were null and void, had nothing, and that's why the game ended up being an 11-goal loss for us. So yeah, tough again. Shinboner of the week and the North Podium voting. For me, I'm just giving the Shinboner of the week to a highlight, really, and McKercher was, I guess, the exponent of this highlight. So he is going to be the Shinboner of the week. It was his goal in the second quarter. I referenced it during the game review. It was, for me, the biggest highlight of the game. Larky's goal probably would have been a greater highlight had it came at a different time, but it was just in that dead time with a few minutes to go in the last quarter. So it's the McKercher goal. Sheezel had a clearing kick from defensive 50, got it out to the wing or just defensive side of the wing. A contest was created. I think it might have been Zerha in the air that got it to ground. JK picked it up and found some quick hands to Zerha. He gave the hands to Simpkin. Simpkin kind of assessed his options, drew a player, and then gave the hand pass over the top to an overlapping McKercher. And he had just made a perfect run. He's got that ability to find space. When he doesn't look like he's sprinting, he just picks up pace. And he was running virtually through the middle of the ground, not quite through the centre circle, but nearly. Takes a couple of strides and kicked truly from just outside 50. The ball bounced on the goal line through for a goal. It's that line-breaking, gut-busting, smart movement that I think excites us so much about him. The fact that he's playing higher up the ground than he was last year gives him the capacity to kick goals like this. He kicked a very similar goal last week as well. So for me, that's what we want to see from him. I think holistically, McKercher's game, he was one of the few that played well in the second half when the chips were down, when things weren't going well. I thought, he was still gut busting. I thought he played a really solid game, deserving of Shinboner of the week for that lovely highlight play, but also his efforts across the game. He had 22 disposals, kicked a goal, 4 marks, 4 inside 50s, 91% disposal effectiveness. So a great outside game, which is something that we're lacking at the moment, to be honest. We don't have enough players that are good on the outside. We have some ball winners. We've got some inside players, particularly when Wardlaw comes back in. We'll have another of those, but we don't necessarily have enough players that can play a good outside game and actually hit their kicks. McKercher did have a clanger, don't get me wrong. It wasn't a perfect game, but by and large, he makes good decisions and he creates space for himself, which gives him time to hit the right target. So a great game from McKercher, and that highlight in particular, I think, was, in an otherwise shocking game, that was a nice thing to see, because it gives you a bit of a glimpse of what we can do when it all comes together, I guess. Constanti with the quick hands, Zerha, Simpkin, McKercher goal. We'd love to see much more of that, but unfortunately in a game like this, it was slim pickings for Shinboner of the week because there weren't too many highlights. North Podium voting, I mean, clearly no one with the 4 votes, and there's not a lot of votes to give out this week, as you'd expect in a performance like that. I thought that Sheezel's game was just good enough to get him the 3 votes. 34 disposals, 9 marks, 1 of them contested, 3 tackles, 3 clearances. Just one of those games that we've seen from Sheezel over the past couple of years where he did absolutely everything that he could off halfback and through the middle at times to win us this game, or to be competitive in this game. His contested mark was a brilliant slips catch. It was not a great kick to him at halfback, and he somehow took that contested mark, juggled it. I don't know how he took that mark, really well opposed, but that's what he does. I think the fact that we moved into halfback, I don't want to see him there all year, but I do think if it's not going well for us and we need some more clear heads and assured disposal makers down back, I'd like to see Sheezel there at times. With McKercher moving up the ground, with Finn O'Sullivan, we've got other players that we can shift out of there if we need to. I thought it was a smart tactical move by Clarko. It's one of the few things that did work for us in the game, and Sheezel deserving of the 3 votes. It was a toss-up for 2 or 3, but I think he was that good at half-back in a game where he didn't have many helping him. I think he's worth the 3 votes. 2 votes for Colby McKercher. I've already spoken about him in the Shinboner of the week, so I'll move on from him, but I thought he had a really nice game. And then the other one that got 2 votes, Luke Parker. 27 disposals, 2 goals, 3 marks, 8 tackles. 3 of those were inside 50, 5 clearances. This is the exact kind of game that we got him across for. Playing against his former side, did a little bit of everything, was physical, he was mostly clean. There was a moment when the ball went through his hands and he would have liked that back again. But that aside, I thought he made some good decisions despite others around him having some issues. And yeah, this is the sort of Luke Parker game that Sydney fans have seen for the past 10 years. He's such a consistent performer. He's strong over the footy, and whilst he's never been a player that's going to get it 45 times, 25 disposals from Luke Parker are generally really strong, and this game was no exception. Like I mentioned, kicked the 2 goals as well, which really helped. Kicked one early and then one late, both from kind of crumbing situations in the forward line, which, that we're going to need him to do that. This year, we need some midfielders that can go forward and hit the scoreboard. He did that. So a really nice game from Luke Parker. And then we get into the 1 votes, and only 2 of these as well. Luke McDonald, I think you'd be hard-pressed to say that he didn't play his role. 18 touches, 7 marks, went at 100% disposal effectiveness. I don't really think he put a foot wrong, and therefore I think he played his role and is deserving of the 1 vote. Yes, he was outmarked by Joel Amati when the defenders pushed up and switched, but I don't think you can ding him for that. He made some nice, quick decisions when he had the ball. He was always an option for other players under pressure to kind of release that pressure. I've just been super impressed with his start to the year. I have to think that releasing him from his leadership duties has freed him up a little bit. He certainly looks like a player who's playing with a little bit more freedom. And, I'm not saying that this was one of his best games, but I think in terms of, I'm tend to giving votes out this year, 1 vote if you've played your role, and I think alongside Sheezel, those are the 2 defenders that I could definitely say played their role. So 1 vote for Luke McDonald, and then the final vote getter, I think Paul Curtis, he's deserving of a vote. I also think he played his role. 14 disposals, 2 goals, 6 marks, 1 of those contested, 5 tackles, all of those inside 50, had a goal assist. Did his job as a pressure and goal dangerous forward. His tackling was great. He took advantage of the opportunities that did come his way. I thought he presented all night. Sure, he made a mistake going inside 50 just like everyone else, but that aside, I think the fact that he was able to hit the scoreboard and pressure and tackle, he did his job. And I think, the fact that he kicked his goals earlier in the game, but then was still pressuring and tackling across the rest of the game says to me that, again, played his role, wasn't one of his better games, but between him and Larkey, I think it's encouraging that even though we're not playing well, they're still able to contribute with a couple of goals each. That's what we want to see. It's a bit like the round 1 game where, similarly, I think Curtis found it really hard to get involved, but then he did kick some goals late to, assert himself on an otherwise quiet night. That's what you want from your forwards. You want them to be able to, even if they're drifting in and out of the game, when they're in the game, you want them having an impact. And I think that Paul Curtis did that. So 1 vote for him. So to recap, Sheezel 3, 2 to McKercher and Parker, 1 to McDonald and Paul Curtis. And funnily enough, that does make the current standings very, very even. It's Tom Powell, Nick Larkey and Harry Sheezel on the top on 6 votes. Luke McDonald, Jai Simpkin and Paul Curtis second place on 5 votes. And Tristan Sherry, LDU and Colby McKercher equal third on 4 votes. So 9 players there on the podium as it stands. Hopefully over the next couple of games that does spread out a little bit because it's challenging. My spreadsheet's looking pretty numbers heavy and confusing at this stage, but I think a tough game to get votes in a pretty poor performance from the team overall. It's losses like this in which we do need to console each other, so please help me out and share this podcast with any North Melbourne fans that you know. Give us a subscribe on your chosen podcast service. A rating or review would be awesome as well. You can get involved with my social accounts at NorthPod Show, X, Blue Sky, Instagram, that kind of business. And if you would like to support me and support the show in another way, you can find the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes. I do appreciate anyone and everyone who would like to support the show. And just by being a listener, you are helping me out. So thank you so much. Kanga clipboard time, and I do have quite a few notes to get through, so I'll try to, I always try to keep these podcasts in the 45 to 50 minute mark, so hopefully I can do that again for you and still unpack what I have on this notepad, so to speak. I think it's blatantly obvious that this group needs leaders that can stand up in moments or at times like that third quarter. There was just not enough leaders around the footy that were able to junk the game up and stop the run on that the Swans were getting in that third quarter. And we've heard that time and time again. I don't think I could fault Luke Parker. I thought that he did his absolute best. He stood up in the way that he could. That's why we got him across. But watching Jai Simpkin give that impassioned speech to the huddle after the game on the ground, I couldn't help but think, yeah, but you're part of the problem, mate. Like, Jai tries his absolute best, but his disposal is just so deflating at times. It would have to be in the back of the players' minds as they're listening to him that, he can't ask us to lift when he's kicking it like that. It's a tough one because I've no doubt that Simpkin has the support of the group. But in that moment, watching him give that speech, it played on my mind. He had a really tough night, Simpkin, because every time he did something nice, he followed it up by butchering the footy, which is not new to him. It's still an area of his game that is of great concern to me, particularly because we have so many players that probably fall into that same category. Nick Larkey's a natural leader, but you can't help much when the ball wasn't getting down to you. It has to be up to the mids. So I thought Sheezel and Parker just probably needed one more midfielder to be able to stand up with them. And Sheezel was spending not as much time in the midfield as he normally or as he traditionally has this year. So whether that's Powell or Simpkin or big money LDU, it's got to start from the middle. And we just didn't have a player that stood up and put the team on their back, unfortunately, and got their hands dirty. LDU he's a watch for me because he definitely hasn't lit it up this year. Sure, he's got 4 votes. He's played some good footy, but if we are going to give him this massive contract, which by all accounts it sounds like it's going to be happening, a 7-year, $9 or $10 million kind of deal, we're going to need to see him play better than he has the last couple of weeks. Sure, he can burst away from stoppage a couple of times a game, but that's not, for me, that's not $1 million plus. So I just need to see a little bit more from him. Had an amazing year last year, but the way that he started the year, we need him to be an on-field leader, and he simply wasn't that in this game. Speaking of which, the midfield got a bath. I don't think that is unfair to say. It's rare, but it happened. Tristan Sherry was outsmarted in the ruck, I thought. Whilst he wasn't completely smashed, he certainly, I think, was beaten by Brodie Grundy. Just a smarter ruckman. I thought that Grundy really baited Sherry into making some mistakes in the ruck, and around the ground, Sherry also wasn't able to have the impact that we'd like him to have. He dropped a pretty nice, or pretty simple, what would have been a simple intercept mark in the middle of the ground, which hurt. I thought Sherry had an off night. And the mids, by extension, just were not able to get on top in the clearances. I thought the first half we were pretty strong, but by the end of the game, Sydney was well on top, and they just waltzed out of stoppage far too often. It was 38-30, I think, in the clearances. Let me check that. Yeah, 38-30 in the clearances. We lost the hit out 31-24. And as a result, it was a belting in the inside 50s, 56 to Sydney, 37 to us. You're never going to be close to winning a game with numbers like that. I thought Powell, LDU, and Simpkin were all down on impact. And that being said, Sydney also, their individual midfielders didn't have high numbers. Heaney only had it 19 times. Chad Warner only had it 10. He did kick 2 goals, which helps. But it was just a pantsing from a team that doesn't need to accumulate. They just use the footy extremely well when they get it. That I think was the major difference, and I spoke to that in the story of the game segment. But the way that Sydney would just move out of stoppage with seemingly no pressure and therefore hit a target in their forward half was just embarrassing at times to see how flat-footed we were. Yeah, it was really disheartening. I thought that the way that the midfield, to me, I think there were players or moments that you could definitely point to and say, well, they've just given up. They weren't chasing hard enough. They gave up on that, and then, one way or another, if they were actually pressing up and trying their absolute best, they could have maybe impacted a contest better. I thought a player like Bailey Scott, whilst not a midfielder, plays in the middle part of the ground. He had a really bad game, or just a game where he didn't have any impact. And unfortunately, we have too many of those players that, either they're a net negative or they're not able to get themselves into the game. And just too many of those players were players playing through the middle of the ground. It's supposed to be a strength for us, but it did not look like a strength last night. Speaking again to the middle of the ground, the fact that Dylan Stephens came in and played a full game, at least to me, it looks like that meant that Robert Hansen Jr. spent most of the game as a forward, and he really struggled to impact the game in the forward 50. He did have a little bit of wing time, and I thought when he did come up the ground, he looked lively, he looked involved, but aside from that, most of his time was in the forward line and just wasn't able to impact. 7 disposals, 0 tackles, 0 goals. Didn't even look like scoring a goal. That's not going to cut it. At times, it just looked like he was kind of idly chasing players around the forward line, haplessly, to be honest. For me, he looked more dangerous up the ground. Dylan Stephens played an okay game on the wing. I don't think it was great, but it wasn't bad. I'm just not sure that it worked for the balance of the team, because I thought that Hansen Jr. has been playing that wing role well. Not amazing, but well. And, we've substituted that for Dylan Stephens playing also an okay game on the wing, but we've got nothing out of Robert Hansen Jr. then as a small forward. I don't know what the solution is, but for me, if we're going to invest some time in Hansen Jr., I think it needs to be more spent on the wing. If that means that we can't get Dylan Stephens into the game, I think I'm okay with that. Yeah, it's a tough one, because for me, it's a direct correlation. Stephens comes in, plays the full game. Hansen Jr. moves more forward, has little impact. It didn't work in this game, and you could probably say similar things last week. I think Hansen Jr. found it really hard to get involved any time where he was playing that forward pocket role. I think if he's playing as a forward, he's got to play as a higher forward, play that role that we've seen Eddie Ford play over the past couple of years. Come up really high, get yourself involved, and then get on your bike and get back and hope that you can have an impact once the ball gets there. It didn't work for me, and that's a shame. Another one that it didn't work for, Jack Darling had a shocker. 6 disposals, 3 marks, 5 free kicks against. He did have 2 goal assists. One of them was a late clearance and goal assist that I think did help his stats sheet, but this was a game that I think that the doubters would point to as a concern, that maybe the game is going past him. He allowed, just physically, he was beaten in the contest, and you're allowed a down game. I think he's had a positive start, but he needs to bring more when Sydney's tall defenders are having such an impact, whether that's taking his direct opponent away from contests, or if he's getting free because his opponent's being drawn in as a third man. One way or another, he has to have more of an impact as a forward. His ruck work, aside from that late clearance, was nothing to be excited about. He didn't have that. That's part of the reason why Larkey was able to go in there and have an impact as well. So, a disappointing outing from Jack Darling. Probably his worst. This is his worst game as a North Melbourne player, but hopefully it's a blip. We know that he's not going to be an amazing player like he was at his peak for West Coast, but his floor, I guess, can't be this low, because it was a disappointing outing for him. And then the last thing on my clipboard here, Riley Hardiman, I think, deserves to play a full game. I'm just not sure how we make that happen. He came in as a replacement for Foss, so he really was the 24th player in the side. I think he'd be super helpful to support Caleb Daniel in that distributing role in the back line. I think Hardiman has some really good defensive tendencies, so he's not just a distributor. Similar to Caleb Daniel, he can tackle, he can make a contest in the air, unlike Daniel. He had 10 disposals in his 32% game time and looked assured. Similar to Dylan Stephens last week, I don't think he could have done much more coming in as the sub. I think he has earned the chance to play a full game. I'm just not sure how that happens, because O'Sullivan's going to come back in next week, you would think. Archer is coming back from suspension. Both of them are likely to return. Wardlaw's on the precipice. He's playing some VFL this week. It's hard to see where Hardiman gets a full game at the moment, but I think we have to make that happen. So whether that means Whitlock's coming out and we're going a little smaller, or we're losing a Whitlock and say a Dylan Stevens or a Robin Hanson Jr. and we're playing some more players that can kind of play some wing, some half back. I'm not too sure, but Hardiman is one that I think could be a really good distributor off half back. I thought he did nothing wrong in the time that he did play, but yeah, it's hard to find game time, but it shouldn't be because we have so many players not performing. Like, whether that means that Darcy Tucker comes out, he was one that I thought was fine. I thought he played a solid game, didn't make too many mistakes, but is it time that we're playing someone at a younger age profile than him potentially? Because you're not dropping Luke McDonald. I thought he played his role. He's been good. So if we're wanting some turnover, it's going to have to be maybe some of these more established players. Even Bailey Scott, I think, is one that, his position shouldn't be a guarantee because of the way that he's played this year. I mean, he hasn't got a vote yet, so that I guess probably speaks to how he's been playing. He hasn't been playing well enough on that wing and getting enough of the footy. So disappointing from him. Riley Hardiman, I think I would like to see a full game from. I'm not sure where it comes from as yet. Around Arden Street, rounding out the podcast. We're done with that game now, and thank goodness for that. It's not a game that I'm going to be revisiting with any kind of happiness. Can't speak about the VFL, unfortunately. They're about to get underway as I'm recording this, but I guess fingers crossed that George Wardlaw gets through unscathed. I'm not sure if there's a plan for him to play the full game or part of the game, but I suspect that he'd be on a minutes restriction if he's returning through the VFL. So that's, I guess, one to watch, but sorry, I can't speak to that and the VFL. But hopefully they're able to back up their performance from last week and finish it off, unlike they were able to do last week. The major piece of news, I spoke about LDU. There's been some, I guess, rumours that he's getting closer to sign. Nothing confirmed there. But a signing that was confirmed during the week was Taylor Goad. The rookie ruckman has extended through to 2028. It's an interesting one. I'm not sure if he was coming out of contract this year or if it was next year. But the fact that we've extended him out to 2028 is great. We obviously believe in him as a longer-term ruck prospect, which is fantastic. I would just question whether or not we needed to sign him at this point. It's great for him, and I think it's a nice thing for the fans to go, great, we've secured this player, but ultimately he hasn't played a game for us. Was there a need to push out his contract beyond this year or whenever it was? He must have been either out this year or out next year, I guess. Anyway, just an interesting one. Great that we're believing in him. We must see the future potential in him. I saw some okay things from him in the preseason, no doubt about it, but I think he's still a little while away. But that's okay with Rucks. Rucks take time. For now, Sherry had a bad game, but we know that Sherry right now is a really good ruckman, so we don't need Taylor Goad to be primed and ready at the moment. But I would hope by the end of that contract, by 2028, we're seeing some Taylor Goad in the side. Otherwise, you just have to question what the go is. Maybe we should be excited that we've secured him on a cheap deal. Maybe that's the lens for us. Not too sure. I don't have the monetary details in front of me, but yeah, it was an interesting announcement during the week. It's not one that I was expecting. In terms of next week, it's Gather Round. We are playing the Gold Coast Saturday the 12th of April at 12:35 in the Barossa. First time that footy's been played in Barossa. There's another game there on the weekend as well. Don't remember that off the top of my head. But look, nice that we're not playing Brisbane. That's a positive. We hopefully will be more competitive than we've been. But yeah, I mean, Adelaide or the state of South Australia is not a state that's been giving us much joy in recent years. We were there last week for a loss at Adelaide Oval. And our previous trips to Gather Round have been pretty shocking. So hopefully we can have a more promising game there this time. But the Suns are in some pretty good form. They're coming off a 1-point win against the Crows in a bit of a controversial finish there. Yeah, I mean, it looks like the Suns are finally putting it together. I don't know if they're going to push for a premiership this year, but they are looking like they're going to push for the 8, which that would be a first for the Suns. Haven't made the 8 yet. And maybe this is the year. So I think it's going to be another tough game. I always thought that the first half of our year that the fixture looked pretty tough. It's great that we were able to secure that win against Melbourne. I think that's taken some pressure off, but we can't continue to have performances like this one against the Swans. I think the Adelaide game was kind of on the precipice. We were probably just close enough that we could feel okay about it, but there's nothing okay about a 60-odd point loss. So we're going to need to bounce back against Gold Coast. We don't need to win, but we've got to be competitive. We cannot afford to have another quarter like that third quarter against the Swans, and I'm sure Clarko will speak about it. I guess that's the last thing to end on. Clarko's press conference was very restrained. He seemed to play down everything that he was asked in terms of his level of disappointment. There was a lot of praising of the Swans and talking about them as a mature side, and it was a straight bat. I hope behind closed doors it's a different story. I hope that Clarko is going with I'm not going to throw my players under the bus with the media, but I would have to hope that particularly some of those more senior players that aren't playing well or that didn't play well, I hope he is saying to them, hey, we've got to be better than this. And I have to imagine that he would be. He didn't look happy every time the cameras cut to him in the coach's box. He didn't look happy. So I am taking it, and I'm choosing to believe that whilst he's put on a brave face and a diplomatic face for the press, I really hope that behind closed doors he's giving it to some of those players and showing them what's not working, because there'd be no shortage of clips to show of things not working, no doubt. So we'll end on that. That's the last that I want to think about this game. It was a shocker. The only footage worth reviewing, you could watch Nick Larkey's late goal from the boundary. I will give you permission to watch Colby McKercher's goal running through the middle. And if you'd like, you can also watch anything that Harry Sheezel was involved with. He had a really nice game. Beyond that, we wipe it from our memory. We move on to next week, and we hope that we can finally get a win at Gather Round against the Gold Coast Suns. I hope that you can forget that performance and have a good week. Hope it doesn't, you're not dwelling on it too much. That's not weighing heavily on you. And hopefully we can chat after a better performance in about a week's time. Go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at NorthPod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.